Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes renting fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Straight Shift. One of the most common questions that I get asked outside of my normal car buying business is, how can I find a good mechanic? Where should I take my car? Finding a good mechanic is harder than finding a good hairdresser, especially for women. There's been so much distrust built up over the decades. Women feel that they are taken advantage of by service and repair shops, even more than by the salespeople at dealerships. Because, again, the automotive industry is still very male dominated, and female customers have traditionally not been treated with the same respect. There have been shops out there, mechanics out there who see a woman and assume she doesn't know diddly squat about cars just because she's a girl, and they take advantage of that. They try to sell her services and parts that she does not need. I see this all the time. It's such a common problem in the industry that several women have actually become mechanics themselves because they were so sick of how they were treated by the shops and mechanics that were already out there. If any of you have ever watched the show that is on what used to be Velocity Channel, is now called Motor Trend TV, All Girls Garage, Bogey is one of the hosts of that great show. She is a master certified technician herself and a very dear friend of mine. Her whole story is that she became a mechanic. She went to school, she got the training, she got the certifications, and eventually opened her own shop so that she could do it differently because she was so freaking sick of the way she was treated by the industry. So she decided to do something about it. Becoming a mechanic yourself is not realistic for most people. We are at the mercy of taking our cars into a shop to a technician to be serviced for us, and we can't do everything. And it's interesting because so many men feel the same way about the industry, especially if they're not car guys, or even if they are car guys. Sometimes they know enough to know that they're not necessarily being told the truth by the shop. So I wanted to do a podcast on how do you find a good mechanic, an honest mechanic. And as I was jotting down all my thoughts on this and creating an outline for the podcast, I realized this is a lot of stuff. So this is going to be a two-part series on how to find a good mechanic, because we can't talk about how do you go through that process of finding a mechanic without talking about why the industry is so screwed up in the first place that it created this industry-wide sense of distrust between consumers and the automotive service industry, the shops. So the first part that we're going to go through today is I'm going to tell you what is wrong. How does this industry work, and what is inherently wrong with it? I have a lot of experience looking behind the scenes of the automotive service industry, both from when I was a consultant and I worked on dealership and service shop processes and technology and some of the things I saw behind the curtain there. But I've also been married to a master certified mechanic for nearly 10 years, and I have seen him struggle as someone inside the industry. And it's just given me a lot of insight under the covers of what goes on at mechanic shops within the industry. And it's had me come to the conclusion that there are some things that are inherently broken in the whole industry, in the business process. So I want to talk through a lot of that. And don't worry, it's not going to be completely negative, because there are shops out there that are doing a good job. And I'm going to talk to you about, what those shops are doing differently. And then in 2 weeks, we will do part 2, and I'll get into a lot of the nitty gritties of how do you evaluate shops and mechanics so that you find the one that is right for you and your vehicle. So let's just go ahead and get started and talk about what's wrong that's caused all these problems in the industry and why it's so dang hard to find a good, honest mechanic. It starts, in my opinion, with the way mechanics are compensated. The standard methodology in the industry is for mechanics to be paid on what is called flat rate, meaning they are paid a specific number of dollars. It's really a number of hours. So each job, let's say you have a 2010 Ford Escape. I'm just throwing a car out there. And you need new front brakes. There are books in the industry that say, okay, for a 2010 Ford Escape brake job, this is how many hours it should take. The reason they have these is because every mechanic is going to take a little bit longer to do the job. So in order for the industry to be able to have any standards to hold mechanics to and be able to give any consistent price quotes to consumers, they have what's called book values for each of these jobs. And that gives the customer an idea of how much they should pay for a brake job, for example, on their specific type of car in their geography. So the number of hours is typically the same. So a lot of brake jobs are an hour and a half or 2.5 hours. What changes is the hourly rate that's applied to that, because different shops charge different rates, different geographies charge different rates. It's a lot cheaper to have your car work done in middle of nowhere, South Carolina, than it is in the middle of Manhattan or San Francisco, for example. So just cost of living changes. But the book times at least provide a ballpark standard for shops to base their pricing on. And it's also how the mechanics are compensated. What it doesn't take into account is that, number one, those book times are often not right. It doesn't take into account a car that has a whole lot of rust on it where you've got to break off bolts and the parts just don't want to come off and go back on really easily because of the condition of the car. That takes a lot longer. A smart shop will add time to that. We call it the rusty car factor or the crappy car factor to compensate the mechanic, and the customer will have to pay more. You know, if you got a rusty car, sorry, but it takes longer to work on rusty cars than non-rusty cars. But the bottom line is the mechanics are paid by the job, no matter how long it takes them to do that job. And in many cases, they are only paid when they have jobs to work. A lot of states, the minimum wage laws don't apply the same way to mechanics that they do normal hourly workers. Believe me, I have researched this because it has really ticked me off in the past the way I saw mechanics, particularly my own husband, were compensated or not compensated. It wasn't uncommon to see a mechanic work, be at work 60 hours a week, but then their paycheck was for 12 hours because that's how many hours they actually turned based on the work that was available or that they could get done depending on what was going on in the shop. So you can imagine how stressful and frustrating that can be when you are trying to pay your bills every month. Those bills don't necessarily change, but you never know how much you're going to make every 2 weeks, depending on how the hours come through the mechanic shop. And if mechanics are paid by the job, no matter how long it takes, let's think about that logically. What does that incentivize them to do? To rush, to hurry, to try and get the job done as fast as they can, because the only way they can make money is to turn more hours than book time specifies. And this can lead to some pretty shoddy, sloppy work. There are some mechanics that are really good, they're very experienced, and they can swap parts, especially if it's a type of job that they do on a regular basis. And so they know all the shortcuts. They just have it down to a science so they can get it done really fast. Those guys are good. There are not that many of them out there, though. And so, unfortunately, most mechanics, and I am talking very generally about averages across the industry, but these are things that I have personally seen, so I'm not making this up. They rush. And as a result, they cut corners, they often do shoddy work, they skip steps, and you as the customer are the one who ends up paying for that. An example, this is something that drives me absolutely batshit crazy, is when they are taking the wheels off of your car. Maybe they're rotating your tires or they're doing a brake job. They have to get to the parts that are underneath your wheels. They take the wheels off and then they put them back on. And the fast way to do it is to just take their impact gun, take your lugs and just go zip, 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 and zip it on there. What that does is that over torques your lug nuts. Believe me, guys, you do not want your nuts to be over torqued. It is not a good thing. So that can cause your brake rotors to warp. It wears out your lug nuts. And in the end, it ends up costing you more money as a consumer because those parts are going to break faster. The proper way to do it is to start the lug nuts by hand, so you make sure you don't cross thread anything, and then you use a torque stick to limit the maximum torque that the impact gun can put on those lugs. And then the last step is to take a torque wrench set to the proper torque setting, 90 foot-pounds, 100 foot-pounds, whatever the spec is for your car, and then torque them down properly. That takes 4 times as long. And so many mechanics don't do it. They're like, screw it, I don't care. It's not my car. And it ends up hurting your car and it costs you more money. But hey, it's faster for them and they make more money. This is why I say the industry is inherently broken, because mechanics are incentivized. It is to their personal financial benefit to cut corners and go fast. There are a lot of mechanics out there who their personal integrity does not allow them to do that. They're like, that's just wrong and I will not do it to the customer. My husband was one of those people. Those mechanics tend to not make any money in the industry, and it makes it very hard for them to make a decent living. So this is one of the reasons that I say that things are kind of broken. It's when mechanics cut corners. Another way sometimes they cut corners is they just won't do all the steps. Oh, I'm supposed to change a cabin air filter. Well, they'll never notice if I don't do it. We'll just charge them for it anyway. I know several dealerships that have done this to clients of mine. So things like that do happen. And when a mechanic does something fast and they make a mistake, very often you will notice the problem as a customer, and it forces you to bring your car back to the shop and be like, hey, you guys screwed something up. And then you have to have sometimes an argument with the shop to see if they'll take ownership of that. In the industry, we call that a comeback. And unfortunately, not all shops are good at tracking comebacks as a part of their technician productivity. They track technician productivity, meaning how many hours do they turn book time versus how many actual clock hours. So if a workday is 10 hours, do they turn 14 or 15 or 18 book hours in that 10-hour time? That means they're highly productive, means they're going to make money. They make the shop money. If they turn less hours in a day, like mechanics that take their time and are very meticulous and are more perfectionists, they might only turn 4 or 5 hours in an actual 10-hour day, and they're penalized for that low productivity, even though they're doing it right. Shops that factor in the comebacks, so the mechanics that are fast and they may turn a lot of hours, but they have a lot of comebacks because they screw up all the time. If they track that and the mechanics are then penalized for that by, hey, you screwed up, you cut corners, now you have to fix it the right way, and I'm not paying you to do the job twice because we're not charging the customer to fix the mistakes that we made. So, but not all shops do that. So, and even the ones that do, very often for mechanics, it's worth it to have those few comebacks, because not every job that you cut corners on is going to cause a comeback. So if you work the law of averages and you work the numbers, it's still worth it to many of them to just be fast and to cut those corners and to deal with the comebacks as they happen. But mechanics that have lower productivity because they take their time and they're very meticulous and have zero comebacks, they're not always rewarded for that good customer service, that good work that they do, because the shops need the volume. They need the volume. And this gets into where the attitude of the shop, which is directed by the owners, what are their priorities? Do they care about volume? How many hours can we turn? How many hours can we turn? Make money, make money, make money. versus what's the quality of those hours? What is our customer retention? Are we looking at car count, meaning how many cars we get in and out every single day versus what's the quality of those customers and how much money do they spend and what is their loyalty? Do we retain those customers? Those are bigger business concepts that not every shop owner pays attention to. So many of them, unfortunately, are just about how many hours can we turn through the shop, regardless of the quality and the retention. And that's just bad business owners. And unfortunately, there are a lot of bad business owners in this industry. I suppose there are in every industry, but I've seen a lot of them in this industry. Another thing that whole environment contributes to is that mechanics also end up fighting with each other over the good jobs. Some jobs are considered what they call gravy jobs. Fluid flushes and brake jobs are considered gravy by the mechanics because those jobs are easy to do and you can usually do them a lot faster than the book time you're paid for. So those are the jobs that make you money. So mechanics will fight over those jobs. Some shops, depending on how they're managed, whoever's managing the workload may allocate the jobs based on who is the best mechanic to get that particular type of job done, as in what's in the best interest of the customer. Some of them have a policy of they just put the jobs up there and the mechanics, whenever they're free, can just come up and grab whatever job they want. Well, what happens in that situation is mechanics, they look, okay, where are the gravy jobs? Where's all the brake jobs? And they'll grab all of those and grab the keys to those cars and then go lock them in their toolbox and hide them from the other mechanics. So the customer ends up waiting around because that mechanic is hoarding that job, but they don't have time to get to it yet. So now the customer's waiting. The other mechanics don't have access to it because it's been stolen and hidden from them. I have literally seen this type of negative work environment happen on a regular basis. I've seen it happen at dealerships. I've seen it happen at independent shops. And so the mechanics end up treating each other as enemies. They don't trust each other. They stab each other in the back. And they're certainly not interested in helping each other get the job done. And nobody is thinking about what is in the best interest of the customer. What is the right thing to do for my customer? They don't care. They're in it for themselves. And that's because they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to make enough money to put a roof over their head and food on the table. And I have seen this so many times, and it really stinks. And so dealership and repair shop internal politics can get very, very ugly, and it can be a very negative work environment. And it's one of the reasons that there is so much turnover with mechanics at shops. Mechanics are known for shop hopping. Grass is always greener on the other side. So it just creates this negative environment, this high turnover that hurts the customer, and it hurts the shops, and it hurts the mechanics. So I'm going to take a quick break, get off that soapbox, and when we come back, we're going to go into a little more detail about some of the things that shops that are doing it right. What are they doing that might be some light in this industry? Be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
The Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Straight Shift. This is part one of a two-part series on how to find a good mechanic. And today we've been talking about What is wrong in the automotive service industry that has created such a feeling of distrust between consumers and mechanics and repair shops? Why do we feel we cannot trust the shop when they're telling us, hey, your car needs new brakes? Is that true? Are they lying to me? What's going on? And why do we have a problem with getting good quality work done to our vehicles? So, we talked before the break about the way mechanics are typically compensated that incentivizes them to work fast and sloppy just so that they can turn more hours than they actually clock. There's some things that the shops are also doing that is making the problems industry worse. There are so many repair shops out there. And I don't feel that most of them do a good job at differentiating themselves. Automotive service has become just such a commodity. And there is a lot of blame to be placed on us as consumers as well. Consumers, quite frankly, we're cheap. I mean, we've seen this with, we're more interested sometimes in just getting a really low price. We shop so much by price instead of by quality, by customer service. This is why we have, so many Chinese products coming into the US market. And I've got nothing against China, of course, but we have these products that are lower quality, but they're cheap. We're like, woohoo, cheap stuff. We like cheap stuff. I'm just as guilty about this in many cases, but you get what you pay for, people. And when we commoditize, because we don't like to pay for automotive service, it's not something that's sexy to spend money on. And especially when it's unexpected and we didn't have it budgeted. So that's why we tend to shop on price. But when we do that, remember, when you shop on price and force businesses to compete on price, everyone loses. And this is what's happening in the industry. And because the shops get sucked into that compete based on price, because they don't have the business training and experience and knowledge to understand that they don't want to be, and I'm just going to throw this out there, I'm going to use the term Walmart, because Walmart invented the whole competing on price and getting what you pay for. So you don't want to be Walmart. All these shops are just trying to compete based on lowest price, including Walmart, because they have an automotive service shop too, which I would never go to. But when they're not using better business skills through branding and identifying a better target market and figuring out a way to differentiate themselves from all those competitors who are only competing on price, they're hurting themselves. The shops that are doing it right are differentiating themselves better, and they are really looking at who their target market is. And I'm starting to get into a lot of business school type concepts, but it is a passion of mine. And it drives me crazy going around town here in Charlotte. I swear, I think 80% of the independent repair shops around here are named Brothers Something or Something Brothers, which is so unoriginal, is so male dominated, and it just doesn't differentiate. You don't know if is this the same shop? Is they owned by the same company, or is it different? So it's just bad branding. It doesn't differentiate, but it also says, hey, this shop is all about us. If you name the shop after you and your brothers, I realize that's an old-fashioned traditional way to do things, and it can indicate, hey, this is a family-owned business, but it's not necessarily going to appeal to female consumers who are responsible for over 70% of all automotive service dollars spent. And it doesn't necessarily appeal to the younger generation that's used to more targeted branding to be about them and their unique needs. So shops that are not differentiating themselves and are not doing a good job branding, they're making it harder on themselves because they're going to be forced to continue to compete on price. And as much as I hate to say it, so many of these shops are the ones that are owned by men. Granted, men own most of the automotive repair shops in the world and in this country, but I have visibility too into the women in the automotive industry. And the shops that I see that are doing things differently and are really, really successful at doing it are the shops that are owned and run by women. Again, my friend Bogey from All Girls Garage, she owned a shop out in Phoenix, Arizona called 180 Degrees Automotive. That's kind of a weird name for a shop, but the reason she named it that is 180 degrees means the complete opposite of what the normal industry is doing. So with that brand, she was communicating to the market, hey, we do things completely different than the rest of the industry. So for those of you who are frustrated with the normal repair shops, come to us because we do it 180 degrees differently. Extremely successful shop. She sold it a couple years ago to go on to do some more entrepreneurial things, but it's still going well. It was kind of funny. My old brand, before I rebranded under the Car Chick, was Women's Automotive Solutions. And that was actually a branding mistake because it didn't clearly say that we were car buying. And so most people saw Women's Automotive like, oh, you're a repair shop. I can't tell you how many calls I got from women wanting to schedule an oil change. But I got a lot of calls from women wanting to schedule an oil change. So there's definitely an opportunity in the industry to brand a repair shop specifically for women. But it would have to be women owned and operated to have the authenticity to do that. And no, I do not want to be the person to do that, but I will happily support any woman that does. So in talking with a lot of these women shop owners that I'm friends with, particularly my friend Amy Matinat, who she owns Auto Craftsman up in Vermont. It's a small shop, but it's wildly successful. And it's not just because it's small and it's in a small community in Vermont. They have a ton of business. But I asked her, what differentiates your business? How is your business model different? And how do you take care of and compensate your technicians that's different from the rest of the industry that has made you so successful? And she didn't have time to actually be on the podcast as a guest because they're in the middle of winter up there and they're literally booked out through Christmas, putting everybody's snow tires on the cars. But she was happy to share with me her insights and doesn't mind if I give away all of her fancy business secrets. But the shops that are doing things right, again, it starts at the top with the owners and what their goals and priorities are and how they instill their values into their shop culture. Are they putting the customer's best interests first, or are they looking at their bottom line profit first? Good shops will do what is in the best interest of the customer, even if it means losing a little bit of money, because they may lose a few $100 now by not doing this job, but they're going to gain so much loyalty by building trust with the customer when they're honest and say, you know what? We could do this, but you really don't need it right now. So we're going to hold off, or we're going to send you over here to do this instead. If you're just honest, the customer's like, wow, thank you. You've saved me money. You've been honest with me. Especially women will come back. That is how you create loyalty. It is about trust. It is about that relationship. And there are good shops out there that are doing this. Similarly, the shops that are doing it right are taking care of their people. On a broader business scale, Richard Branson, who owns the Virgin Brands, he's one of the wealthiest men in the entire world. He said, if you take care of your employees, if you take care of your people, they will take care of your customers. But so many places put customers first, or they put their own bottom line first over their people. And then their technicians and their service writers don't feel that anybody cares about them. And in an industry where there is a distinct shortage of technicians, there are way more shops than there are techs. Every single shop is hiring pretty much all the time if they have the space to do it, because there's a shortage of good techs out there and good service writers. But one of the things that I saw at some shops was they had a lot of bays. It was a big shop, but they had one mechanic per bay. And that doesn't work real well because very often you have to take apart a car to figure out what's wrong with it. And then You know what's wrong with it. You know what parts you need, but you've got to then go sell the customer on that work. And then you have to order the parts. So meanwhile, the car is half disassembled in your bay. That bay is taken up. You can't move the car back out of the bay because it's in several different pieces, many of which make the car run. So mechanics really need to have at least two bays that they can bounce back and forth between so that they can stay productive while they are waiting for parts or they are waiting for the customer to okay the work. And I have seen shops have one mechanic per bay because they always wanted to have mechanics available and bays available for their customers, but they didn't care about the productivity of their mechanics. They made their mechanics be there 6 days a week, whether they could turn hours or not. And they didn't care if the individual mechanics were productive and were making good money and were happy. They only cared about the bottom line of the shop. And so shops like that tend to have a lot of turnover because the mechanics aren't making money, they leave. So taking care of your people is so key for shops. And Amy shared something very, very personal about her shop with me. She sat down with each of her technicians and, wow, imagine this, asked them how they wanted to be paid. It's very rare for any business to ask their employees, hey, how would you like me to pay you? Normally, as a business, you decide how you're going to pay an employee, but this is really insightful and can be applied to a lot of businesses. Different people like to be compensated in different ways. Different things are important to them, and especially with technicians. Her master technician, her top level tech, he's a European car expert. He's a diagnostics expert. And people like him tend to be slower, steady, methodical perfectionist. This is my husband. This is why he was so frustrated in the industry. These people are not fast, and therefore they don't turn a lot of hours, which under the traditional flat rate pay structure makes it very difficult for them to make money. But they're very good at what they do. Very few technicians out there have the training and the experience to actually be good at vehicle diagnostics. So it is worth it to a shop to compensate that type of technician a little bit differently so that you keep them because they're really good and they rarely have any comebacks, at least none that are their faults. Faulty parts, different issue. So for this technician, he wanted to be paid by the clock, just normal. If I'm here 10 hours, I want to be paid for 10 hours, not by the job. And Amy said, fine, I'll pay you by the hour. And they came up with an hourly rate that worked for him, worked for her. If he ends up working overtime to get a job done, she pays him the overtime, even if the quote book time is less, because it is worth every penny to her to have someone who's that good and that meticulous and has usually zero comebacks. And so she's looking at the bigger strategy, the bigger picture, and the long-term goal. Her mid-level tech, he is what we call in the industry a parts swapper. He's one of those few guys that is fast and good because he stays in his lane. He doesn't want to learn the more advanced skills that would make him good at diagnostics or to be a specialist to work on certain type of cars or to deal with electrical issues. He is really great and fast at swapping parts. So when she has brake jobs, got to change out the struts, got to change out tie rods, suspension parts, those types of jobs that are repetitive and can be consistent across vehicles, that's what he loves to do. And so she pays him by the job because he can turn 40 hours worth of work in 25 actual hours, and she gives him the flexibility to then go home. So he doesn't have to work a 40-hour week necessarily, which with his lifestyle and his family works better for him. He wants to be home at 3 o'clock to spend time with his kids. And so this guy has been with her for 20 years, since he was 17 years old, and she pays him that way. She's got what she calls an apprentice tech, who's her oil change boy. He's newer. He doesn't have as much training and experience. So he does the basic fluid changes, the oil changes. He's gotten really good at doing the safety inspections on the cars, the Vermont state inspections, and she pays him by the hour. So he's there 40 hours. He gets paid for 40 hours and however many cars he works on, that's how many cars he works on. Paying the mechanics differently based on the type of mechanic that they are and what's important to them as people has worked. And so these people are her family. I mean, she treats them like a mom is really, that's just the type of person that she is, but it has created an environment where not only her customers trust them, but they trust each other and they help each other out. There's great teamwork. The more advanced techs are training the younger techs, teaching them all the secrets and the shortcuts and how to do a good job. But they have a full company culture of, when in doubt, the customer comes first. We do what is in the best interest of the customer. And the pay structure is such that it doesn't penalize the technicians for doing that. And as a result, she's had an extraordinarily successful shop for many, many decades, low turnover, high customer retention. And you do have to book an appointment with her a good month out because they are always, always busy. So I have looked at industry data that shows women-owned and operated shops tend to have lower employee turnover and lower customer turnover. They have higher levels of customer loyalty. This is an industry fact. And it's just a difference in mindset about the relationship with the customer and doing it's right versus let's just turn cars, let's just turn cars, let's just turn cars. Now, with all this being said, even the shops that are doing it right are facing some challenges as we go into the future that all independent shops are going to face. Aside from the mess that the pandemic has created, the technology in cars is getting more and more complex. It's getting more and more computer-based and less mechanical parts. And that makes it harder for the independent shops to service these newer vehicles and stay in business. It requires a closer relationship between the shop and the manufacturer. And not every manufacturer is all warm and fuzzy about having relationships with independent shops. The manufacturers are trying to push people more and more to their dealerships, which are their franchisees. And I get that, but it hurts the customer because you don't have the same number of choices. The German brands are the worst for this. Hyundai's great. Hyundai wants independent shops to be able to work on their cars because their goal is to sell more cars than they can service themselves. But if you look at the technology, so many of the onboard computers in the car are monitoring the various systems, are monitoring your oil levels. And so the car's computer is helping you keep track of your service. So it's going to tell you, hey, it's time for my oil change. And in many cases, it will say, would you like me to schedule that for you? Well, they're going to schedule that at the dealership. They're not going to schedule that at your mom and pop shop down the street where you would rather go. So the manufacturers are actually building technology into the cars that motivate you as a customer to do your service at the dealership because it is more convenient. And this is hurting the independent shops. It makes it extremely difficult for them to compete with that. And as we also move more towards electric vehicles, service on them is just different. They don't have as many parts that need to be serviced. And a lot of the service and repairs are actually software updates. So, companies like Tesla, that's more of a computer technology company than it is an automotive company. And they can do a lot of their, quote, service over the airwaves. You don't have to be there. They just send a software update to your car and it fixes the problem. Obviously, they're still working out a lot of the kinks with that process, and it's certainly not smooth, but this is the direction that the industry is starting to move, and it's going to completely change the landscape on automotive service, which again makes it more difficult for shops, especially independent shops, to compete. And finally, cars are just becoming more disposable. They're not designed to last, 20, 30 years like cars made 10 years ago were. So the independent shops who make most of their money servicing cars that are a few years older and are out of warranty, there aren't going to be as many old cars for them to keep on the road. So again, it's going to reduce the amount of business for independent shops going forward. So I know this was a long podcast. I probably could have split it into 3, but the retail automotive industry just had a lot of challenges. Some of them are self-inflicted. Some of them are simply just due to the changing world that we live in, but they all make it hard for us as consumers to find a good and trustworthy mechanic. But there are shops out there that are doing things differently, that are doing a good job, and you can find them. So stay tuned. Part 2, which will come out the middle of December, I'm going to go through the details of how do you evaluate shops. Like if you were trying to find a good doctor for yourself, how do you find a good shop and a good technician to take care of your precious automobile? So stay tuned, folks. And in the meantime, happy holidays and drive safely.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.